Welcome to my video series covering the stories of classic Doctor Who. We reach Serial 5 of Season 1 with the Keys of Marinus. The TARDIS lands on an island with a huge pyramid object in its centre. The Doctor makes sure there is no radiation outside before they leave. As they move about their newfound environment, an unknown creature with webbed hands and feet lurks behind them. Ian and Barbara notice how there seems to be no signs of ambient life. It's dead silent. Susan decides to go for a paddle, but is bumped into by Barbara, dropping her shoes. Before she can go in the pool herself, Ian notices her shoes are melting. Susan returns back to the TARDIS to get some replacement shoes. As the sand mysteriously has pieces of glass within it, Susan borrows Ian's shoes to travel back. Barbara deduces from this that the entirety of the body of liquid they see around them is actually acid. The mysterious webbed figure tries to remove the lock from the TARDIS, but has to quickly dart away when Susan returns. The other three notice a glass torpedo on the shore. They figure out from this that the place is inhabited, with Barbara discovering more further along. One of them contains a protective suit within it. As Susan exits the TARDIS, she notices webbed footprints. Unable to get the others' attention, she investigates herself as the web figure follows her from behind. As the other three decide to travel back to the TARDIS, they notice the huge pyramid-like structure in the middle of the island, somewhere Susan has found herself going to. As Susan continues walking down a long hallway, a figure hiding behind one of its pillars gets ready to attack her. The Doctor figures out that the sea of acid and the glass is a defence against anyone who might want to invade this island. They all decide to follow Susan's footprints to find out where she has got to. As the figure gets ready to attack Susan, it suddenly falls back into a hidden door. Susan doesn't notice this as the other three make it to the large pyramid structure themselves, intending to find her. As Susan walks further down the hallway, she falls into one of the hidden doors herself and screams. Barbara and Ian hear this and run towards the sound, while the Doctor ends up going through another hidden door. Susan, on the other side of the door, almost bumps into the figure that was stalking her earlier. However, she notices that it has been impaled with its own knife, and it falls to the ground. A humanoid figure in a white cloak approaches her. As Barbara thinks to go back to the TARDIS, Ian disappears before she herself also falls through a hidden door. The Doctor, Susan, and Barbara have reunited and deduce that the individuals that are wearing the protective suits are intruders to the island. While they are prisoners, the Doctor has hope that Ian can free them. Another figure in a protective suit jumps the cloaked figure. Ian notices this from afar and intervenes, removing the protective suit figure and pushing him through a hidden panel, which has the figure fall to its death in the acid sea below. The cloaked figure, called Arbitan, wonders why Ian protected him, with Ian inquiring as to where his friends are. Arbitan states they are safe and didn't know whether Ian and the others were more members of the Vord, the creatures within the protective suits, who have recently launched another attack on the island. Arbitan reveals he is alone on this island and promises to release the others and explain the situation. As the five of them enter this large room, the Doctor inquires about the planet's technology. He is brought up to speed with the planet being called Marinus. The machine in this room is the conscience of Marinus that has progressed to influence all of the humanoids on the planet, including the ability to eliminate evil from their minds. This, however, had the downside of preventing them from being able to fight back against the Vord invasion. The people of Marinus tried to alter the machine to make it control the Vord, but now the Vord have figured out how to resist it. The machine has since been upgraded to fight back against this, but needs to be reactivated. This requires finding the machine's micro-keys that have been displaced across the planet. One of the keys is already in Arbitan's possession, but he needs the other four. Arbitan sent all of the others to try and find the keys, but they have not returned. Now the four travellers have arrived, he hopes that they'll go and find them for him. Ian and Barbara have ventured back outside, with the four deciding to return to the TARDIS. As they try and unlock the TARDIS, they discover that a barrier has been placed around it. Arbitan, not accepting their refusal, has now forced them to find the keys or never be allowed to enter the TARDIS again. The Doctor is angry, accusing Arbitan of blackmail, with Ian having to remind him not to go through all this again after their ordeal with Marco Polo. Arbitan provides each of the four with a travel dial that, like the TARDIS, can dematerialise. Barbara is the first to use hers, with the others being shocked by her sudden disappearance before they proceed to do so as well. Arbitan hopes they will succeed, or his people will be doomed. Unfortunately for him, however, a member of the Vord catches him off guard from behind, mortally wounding him. Ian, the Doctor, and Susan have appeared in another location. They notice Barbara's travel dial has been left on the ground, with no sign of her. They assume Barbara has been taken by force. They push the door behind them, only to be blinded by flashing lights before they notice they're in a lavish garden. Barbara, laying down on some furniture and in a change of clothes, notices them and states how glad she is that they have arrived. Barbara tore the travel dial off in a panic, but seems to be completely fine now, mysteriously being waited on by two females. The four travellers are provided with a feast, surprising them at how much food there is. The leader of this place, Autos, comes forward and explains that they are in the city of Morpheton, where the people are provided anything they want. The Doctor wants a laboratory with every conceivable instrument, clearly testing the limits of this supposed paradise. Susan and the Doctor, being exhausted by the situation, decide to sleep, while Ian isn't convinced. He notices how Autos seem to not blink at all. Barbara tries to convince him it's alright and not to judge it based on their Earth customs. As the four of them sleep, a female humanoid enters the room and places objects on all four of their heads. Barbara's falls off and wakes her up, but this causes an alarm to start blaring, causing her pain and eventually knocking her out. The next day, Susan, the Doctor, and Ian are sitting round a table eating breakfast, while Barbara seems to be in a deep sleep. Susan's dress she requested the previous day has been completed. She wants to show Barbara, who is hard to wake, but eventually she does, and seems to notice that her surroundings are not what the others see. The Doctor tries to hand her a mug, but she smashes it out of the Doctor's hands, declaring it's filthy. She pleads with Ian to see the room for what it is. Autos states he only wants to help Barbara, but she runs away. Autos tells the others he'll deal with it as she runs out of the room and quickly hides behind a pillar before he can catch up with her. Autos enters a room with jars containing brains and informs them that Barbara has resisted their power of mesmerant. The girl who placed the devices on their heads, Sabitha, will be punished for this. Their plan is to completely subjugate the travellers, putting them fully under their control. But Barbara, breaking free of this, has a death wish placed upon her. Barbara, still hiding, quietly moves when she hears footsteps. Sabitha leaves the room and walks past Barbara, who confronts her about what is happening here. She tries to snap Sabitha out of the hypnosis. Autos reassures the others that Barbara is fine before Ian and the Doctor enter the laboratory he requested. While we see a simple room with a dirty mug, they see a vast room of equipment that the Doctor states could even help him with the TARDIS. Barbara notices Sabitha is obsessed with a necklace, something she wanted the most that she keeps reiterating that it's hers. Barbara mentions Arbitan, which starts to break Sabitha from the hypnosis. Barbara discovers that Sabitha is Arbitan's daughter. Plans for the free travellers are put into motion to isolate them and use them as slaves for different parts of the society. Autos goes to fetch Sabitha, but notices Barbara and restrains her. Autos is suddenly knocked out by Sabitha, who has broken free of the hypnosis. Barbara rushes off to save the others as Sabitha collapses on the floor. Barbara runs into Ian, who has completely forgotten her. He takes her to the brain jars. They inform Barbara that while they create and control the city, they need humans to feed on and perform their commands. The brains cannot recondition Barbara, ordering Ian to kill her. She pleads with Ian to snap out of it before pushing him back and smashing the jars containing the brains. This wakes Ian out of the trance. We cut to Ian, Barbara and the Doctor having left the city, with all the other freed members burning it down in their absence. Susan follows later, with Sabitha and Autos. They all discuss how Arbitan was isolated and alone, and how another individual, Eprim, has also disappeared searching for another microkey. The Doctor decides to travel forward to Melanus to find Eprim and the fourth key, while Autos and Sabitha decide to join Ian, Barbara and Susan on their journey. Susan, having teleported first, finds herself alone in a loud jungle. Being tormented at all the noise, she shouts for it to stop. The four others have followed after her, and the noise suddenly disappears. They try and calm Susan down and attempt to get her to explain, but she's unable to form into words exactly what it was. Sabitha regards the jungle as a dead place, with her, Ian and Autos finding an archway. Ian, Sabitha and Autos decide to venture off to discover their surroundings, with Susan and Barbara staying behind. Susan, having more time to figure out what she heard earlier, is able to describe it to Barbara. As Barbara and Susan converse, they don't notice one of the tree vines grow and begin to approach Susan's legs. Suddenly, Susan screams out for Barbara, who comes to her aid, pulling off the vine and knocking it with a rock to make sure it's not alive. The two pull more vegetation out of the archway, with Barbara venturing down its dark passage. She sees a statue at the end of it. Ian returns as Barbara has suddenly found the next key. As she tries to reach it, the statue grabs her and twists around as she screams. Autos gives Sabitha the key for safekeeping. Sabitha makes a good point that Barbara was still wearing her travel dial and could have used it to escape. Ian assumes the worst, that Barbara could be injured, so he decides to stay behind to make sure she is alright, informing the other three to teleport onwards to the next key's location. Before Sabitha leaves, she discovers that the key Barbara found isn't actually a real key, but a mock-up of it. Ian promises to find the real one, informing her to join the others. Ian uses the statue as Barbara did before him. He has entered a garden with a frozen knight statue. However, he unknowingly steps on a pressure plate that almost causes it to axe his head off. Barbara, in the nick of time, shouts out at Ian, saving him. Barbara informs Ian that the entire place is full of traps and they must be careful. Barbara stays back as Ian goes to find something to help them. A figure then opens the door behind Barbara. She calls out to Ian before venturing inside. However, as she does, a human-sized net drops down upon her. As Barbara looks up, she sees the ceiling, full of knives, begin to descend. She screams for Ian, but he is unable to help as he himself has been locked behind some iron bars. As the knives get closer and closer to Barbara, a figure is seen to move behind her. Suddenly, the ceiling retracts, and the figure stands upon her, asking why is she searching for the keys. He questions if she is a Vord. He won't believe her when she states that Arbitan sent them. Ian breaks out of the metal bars as the figure has been caught in one of the vines. He shouts out for them to help him, which they do. The humanoid tells them that when the noise starts, it means death, confirming what Susan heard before to be real. He is the keeper of the first key, having waited for Arbitan to send someone to collect it. As he lays dying, Ian and Barbara have to get him to explain where the key exactly is, but he talks in code, something that Ian and Barbara don't initially understand. Ian and Barbara venture into another room and find a safe, assuming that he gave them a safe combination. However, it wasn't as simple as they thought when the combination doesn't work. As they sit in the room and read through his books, Ian reads about a growth accelerator. Barbara looks through another book looking for a safe combination as they begin to hear a loud whispering. Something is trying to get in. Suddenly, giant vines crash into the room, with Ian having to tell Barbara that what he was reading was correct. The plant's growth has been accelerated. The jungle has become hostile. Ian discovers that the code was a chemical formula this whole time. The key is in one of the jars within the room. Barbara finds the jar and the key. The two of them quickly escape via their travel dials. Ian and Barbara suddenly find themselves in a snowy landscape, but Barbara finds herself unable to move due to the intensity of the cold. Ian pleads with Barbara to move before collapsing. Later, Barbara suddenly wakes up to a figure in a fluffy coat staring at her. She quickly faints again as the individual takes the micro key from her hand. The figure has moved Barbara into a hut where he wakes her, with Ian also being there. The figure, called Vaser, introduces himself to Barbara. Ian wakes up, noticing his frostbite-ridden hands, which Barbara helps heal. Vaser informs the two that there are a dozen packs of wolves in the area and the nearest village is 3 miles away. Vaser also speaks of a mysterious madman who helped carry Ian into the hut. The two realise this must have been Altos, who has been searching for Susan and Sabitha. Altos has ventured towards the village, but night is approaching. Ian tries to get Vaser to lend him some warm clothing, but he won't just hand it over for free. Ian reluctantly trades his travel dial for them. Barbara stays behind as Ian leaves. Vaser unnerves her. Ian has found Altos in the cold, while Barbara locates Sabitha and Susan's travel dials as well as the chain with the micro keys within Vaser's table drawer. Vaser explains that he gave the 2 girls food and fire in trade of these trinkets. Altos supposedly forced Vaser to go to look for the girls, and that's how he found Ian and Barbara. Barbara doesn't believe this and accuses him of stealing. Vaser drops his facade and reveals he has endangered not just the girls, but Ian as well. As Ian tries to free Altos from the frostbite in his legs, Altos informs him of Vaser's antagonistic intentions. Ian realises that the bag he was carrying contains raw meat, pinpointing his location directly to the wolves. Back in the hut, Vaser tries to corner Barbara, who runs to the other side and grabs a knife in an attempt to defend herself. As Vaser tries to disarm Barbara, she is able to push him away. This angers him, causing him to chase her around the table. Just as Barbara falls onto the ground and Vaser has his arm stretched out towards her, they hear banging on the door. Barbara uses this opportunity to run. Vaser grabs her and tries to silence her by putting his hand over her mouth, but she bites him and breaks free. Barbara is able to open the door and informs Ian and Altos that the 2 girls are in a cave within the mountain. Vaser tries to feign innocence, but Altos isn't having it, with Ian having to stop Altos so Vaser can lead them to the cave. Susan and Sabitha have run out of paper and wood, holding each other for warmth. Susan states they should go out in search of resources, but the 2 of them are confused as to how they entered the cave, picking a route that Susan thought was the way. The 2 venture the cave but appear to be lost. The other 4 enter the caves but realise the girls have left. Ian deduces they haven't been gone for long and has to deal with Vaser's protests as he refuses to travel any further. Susan and Sabitha come across a rope bridge. Both of them are able to cross it without it falling. Barbara in the meantime realises the cave isn't made of rock, it's solid ice. Susan and Sabitha then find themselves in an opening full of figures that look like knights. They quickly run back the way they came as the others are preparing to cross the rope bridge. As they all reunite, Ian crosses the rope bridge, but Vaser, ever the antagonist, dismantles it, leaving the 5 of them stranded inside the cave. They must venture further into the cave to find a way out, or stay there and freeze. They return to the clearing with the knight statues, Ian connecting them to the supposed demons that Vaser said were located within the mountain. They discover the next key, frozen in the centre of a block of ice. Barbara notices a valve and begins to turn it. The room begins to get warmer, with her deducing that the mountain must have a volcanic spring deep within. The ice containing the key begins to quickly melt. Ian and Altos return to the location of the rope bridge to see if they can do anything to get across the chasm. They are able to place a bunch of large logs across the gap. As the girls stay in the opening waiting for the key to melt, the night statues come alive. The statues advance, causing them all to quickly flee the cave, with Ian being the last to leave. Susan begins to cross the chasm, but some of the logs break as she does. Once she finishes the crossing, the others follow her. Ian catches up and also crosses the chasm, but one of the knights isn't so lucky and falls down it. Vaser is back in his hut, admiring all the items he has taken from the others. The group returns to the hut, startling him, demanding their items back. He runs away in a panic before returning, exclaiming that the mountain devils are coming. The 5 all put on their travel dials in an attempt to leave Vaser behind, but not before he threatens Susan's life. Before he can act on his threat, however, he is killed by one of the knights as they stab their sword through the hut's door. The five quickly twist their dials before the knights destroy the door and enter the hut. Having teleported to a new location, Ian notices a body on the floor next to some boxes. An unseen figure approaches him from behind and knocks him out cold before staging the scene to make Ian look guilty. The figure's gloved hand then opens one of the boxes and steals the final micro key. Ian wakes up to a man called Taran who claims he is an interrogator who wants to know what has happened. Ian has no idea what's going on, but Taran doesn't believe him due to the guard being missing. He assumes that Ian tricked the guard or is in league with him. Ian protests his innocence to no use, with Taran stating he will be charged with murder. This place operating on a guilty until proven innocent law. Barbara is granted visitor access, while the other members of the group try and figure out what exactly happened. The Doctor enters the room, pleasing everyone with his return, revealing they are now at the city of Marinus. The Doctor wants to get right to business, declaring himself as Ian's defence. The court convenes and Ian is sentenced to death 3 days after the hearing concludes, unless they show proof that he is in fact innocent. The Doctor cannot make a statement before he has thoroughly examined the case. After initial hesitance, they grant the Doctor 2 days to perform this. The Doctor reveals that Ephraim was the guard who was murdered and the suspect took the micro key. The Doctor questions Taran with him and Susan trying to decipher the crime. The Doctor connects the location of the micro key with the reveal of the true murderer. The Doctor, having figured out how the murderer got into the room, explains it to Barbara and Susan, with them acting out the scene in real time. The Doctor theorises the relief guard is guilty, with the successful locating of the micro key being the proof they need. Barbara and Susan question both the relief guard Aidan and his wife Calla about the micro key. Susan states they know where the key is hidden, causing Aidan to slip up, making him seem suspicious. As he threatens Susan and Barbara to get them to leave, they accuse him of killing Ephraim, causing him to almost assault the two of them before Calla stops him. As the pair leave, they listen in on the conversation between Aidan and Calla, which ends with a physical altercation. The court reconvenes as the prosecution tries to convince everyone of Ian's guilt. The Doctor's time as defence begins, where he states that while the murderer is in the room, it is not Ian, it is in fact Aidan, calling up Sabitha to back his claim. As Sabitha shows Aidan one of the previously acquired micro keys, he slips up yet again. Before he is able to leave, he is held back, revealing he'll admit the truth, exclaiming he was forced to do it. Suddenly, he is killed before he can say anything more. As the court comes back into session, the judges still accuse Ian of being guilty, stating Aidan was an accomplice. The Doctor is denied time to produce more evidence, with Ian's execution approaching. Barbara is given a message blackmailing her to not pursue the case any further. Barbara answers a call with Susan on the other end. She is being held hostage by the perpetrators. As the call ends, Barbara insists to Sabitha and Altos that Taran must not be informed. Instead of requesting for help, Barbara suggests that they find Susan themselves. As the countdown to Ian's execution continues, Barbara has an epiphany that Aidan knew everyone involved, and that's why he was killed. They decide to ask his wife Calla for more information. Calla seems to be unable to help as she becomes distraught, but as they leave, this turns into a chuckle, revealing that she is the one who has kidnapped Susan. Calla, Aidan, and a third accomplice, Isen, are revealed to have been the ones behind the murder. Isen orders Calla to kill Susan to cover up their crime. Barbara discovers that Calla knew about Susan being on the telephone, despite them not telling anyone. They rush back to her room and catch her in the act. They restrain Calla and free Susan. Barbara informs Taran of the information, and they reunite with the Doctor. They hope the information is enough to free Ian, but Calla has lied and says Ian was her accomplice. Susan tells them that the real accomplice is planning to collect the key, with the Doctor rejoicing that this can be used to acquit Ian if they catch the culprit in the act. The Doctor and Taran trap Isen, with the Doctor revealing where the key has always been. The three culprits wanted to steal the micro key and sell it, with Ian just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The four travellers used their travel dials, with Altos and Sabetha having already gone on ahead. Returning back to the island, the Vord leader Yartek has held Altos prisoner. They inform him of Arbitan's death. Sabetha pretends to not care about Altos to try and set him free, but the Vord use this against her by stating they will kill him. Sabetha, reacting to this, lets her guard down, confirming they are romantically involved. Altos informs Yartek that the Doctor has the final key, as the four travellers are under the impression the TARDIS force field has been lifted. As Yartek begins to insert the remaining keys into the conscience, Ian signals to the other three to stay back. He was aware of a Vord trying to sneakily attack them. They decide to split up. Ian and Susan search for Arbitan, while the Doctor and Barbara go looking for Altos and Sabetha, the latter of which have now been tied up and imprisoned together. As Ian and Susan enter the room with the conscience, Yartek is impersonating Arbitan in an attempt to get the key. He refuses to let the pair of them approach him. Unbeknownst to Yartek, however, Ian has given him the fake key. The Doctor and Barbara have found and freed both Sabetha and Altos. They have to quickly flee the pyramid when it's revealed that placing the fake key into the machine will destroy the entire thing. Back at the TARDIS, the Doctor talks with Sabetha, honouring the legacy of Arbitan. The travellers make their goodbyes as Sabetha and Altos decide to return to Melanus. Being the fifth Doctor Who story in the original show, The Keys of Marinus was given the production code of the letter E. The story was written by Terry Nation, being the first returning writer of the show after having written The Daleks, with John Gorrie directing all 6 of the Keys of Marinus episodes. Verity Lambert continues her role as Doctor Who's producer. All 4 main cast members from previous stories continue yet again with this one, though this is the first serial where one of them would be on holiday for multiple episodes and thus be written out, with it being William Hartnell, who was on holiday for 2 weeks, so does not appear in episodes 3 and 4, with the Doctor being written out by establishing that he travelled on alone, while the other 3 looked for the remaining keys. The Keys of Marinus is the second sci-fi themed story of the show, with the travellers yet again being taken away from Earth. The 6 episodes were released on the then called BBC TV weekly between the 11th of April 1964 and the 16th of May 1964. The 6 episodes were filmed weekly between the 20th of March 1964 and the 24th of April 1964. After Terry Nation had turned in his scripts for the Daleks ahead of schedule, he was commissioned to write another story, though this wasn't The Keys of Marinus. Originally, there was a story titled The Masters of Luxor, written by Anthony Coburn, who wrote the first Doctor Who serial, An Unearthly Child. Masters of Luxor was initially planned as Serial 2, while Terry Nation's first serial, The Daleks, was originally meant to take place as the 4th serial. The 2 were then switched when the Dalek scripts were ready beforehand. At some point after this, The Masters of Luxor was dropped for Terry Nation's second story. While Coburn was paid for his Masters of Luxor scripts, they were ultimately never used. Marco Polo became the 4th serial after delays in set and costume production, which led to the creation of The Edge of Destruction as a quick 2-part 3rd serial, further pushing Terry Nation's second serial to become the 5th overall. Terry Nation's original second story, The Red Fort, was planned as a 7-part story set in the 19th century during the Indian Mutiny, which had a target script delivery date of the 16th of December 1963. After encountering issues with trying to progress forward with Malcolm Hulke's The Hidden Planet serial, which was considered for Serial E after the Daleks got moved up and the Masters of Luxor got dropped, Terry Nation has a meeting on the 21st of January 1964 with David Whittaker, Verity Lambert, and Mervyn Pinfield. Here it is agreed that Terry Nation, after his quick turnaround on the Dalek scripts, will deliver the scripts of 6 episodes within 4 weeks, therefore essentially putting his Red Fort serial on hold. While The Red Fort is said to have been considered a second time to air as the second story of Season 2, due to the high demand of a sequel Dalek story, the story ultimately never materialised. The decision for this seems to have been made by early March 1964, as this is when the 52-episode season was planned out, with it mentioning the final story in this production being a Dalek sequel. Ian wears his outfit from the previous serial, Marco Polo, continuing to establish that these time travelers are on one continuous journey, with each story happening after the last. A sequence featured in the first episode had the Doctor state he was trying to get colour television on the TARDIS scanner, though this would be removed from the episode by the recording stage. This was supposedly why him and Susan had landed in 1963 to get his scanner fixed. This was probably removed as it contradicts the established law that the Doctor cannot control the TARDIS's destination. The mention of colour television still exists in the final episode, but it is quickly glossed over by the Doctor. The sequence with Susan having to replace her acid-ruined shoes was refilmed. In Sentence of Death, Hartnell seems to stumble over a line, but this was actually a deliberate choice in the script, with it becoming a part of the first Doctor's character to stumble his lines, repurposing the initial difficulty that Hartnell faced into a character trait. Director John Gorrie was hired by Verity Lambert, who insisted he direct the serial, despite him not liking science fiction as well as not liking the scripts. He decided to direct it anyway to advance his career. John Gorrie had the job of casting the secondary characters in this serial, with him casting the likes of Fiona Walker as Calla after receiving a letter from her, George Coloris for Arbitan after he immediately thought of him when reading the script, as well as friends of his, Robin Phillips as Altos and Henley Thomas as Taron. Catherine Schofield was cast as Sabitha, with John wanting her character to resemble a princess. The footage of wolves featured in The Snows of Terror was archival footage that the BBC purchased, being repurposed from the 1957 Russian thriller The Grey Robber. Set designer Raymond Cusick has said that each individual episode of The Keys of Marinus had its own challenges considering the lack of budget, but he had to persevere anyway. The set housing the Great Machine of Marinus was problematic, where it got to the point that Raymond had completely run out of budget for the designs. However, he still has some left for the visual effects, so he improvised using that and got Shawcraft models, who did a lot of the practical effects for Doctor Who at the time, to create the machine that houses the consciousness, and ultimately where all the keys were to be placed. The scene where the Vord falls through the secret panel was read by Raymond in the script, who had to ask the director what exactly happened there, the director responding that the Vord falls into the sea of acid, and after Raymond stated that the viewer would just assume he's falling into a dark cupboard, was asked to add the model sequence of the Vord falling into the acid. Like with the Great Machine, Shawcraft models created the giant brains in jars, with Raymond not really describing this as much of a set, but more of just a dark room where he just provided the schematics for the positioning of the entrance and where these vats containing the brains were placed. The laboratory with the rusty mug was also very cheap to pull off. Raymond notes how writers don't have a very good grasp of set design, with him having to ask Terry Nation to elaborate on what he means by the characters walk into a bare white room. Terry stated he didn't know what else to say, and he told Raymond to come up with something. The set used in the transformation scene was one of the most expensive, with the episode containing effects such as the nets falling, the spikes, and the falling ceiling also being quite expensive to make. While the Buddha-esque statue design was quite easy to get carved, they could not afford to get mechanical arms, so instead they had someone act as the statue using their real ones. The Snow Set's bridge actually broke on first use and had to have some scenery used from another show to be within budget, but due to it not looking good enough, this got Raymond into trouble with Verity, who asked him how is he going to improve it. They decided to darken up the set to hide most of the background. One of the most interesting looking sets within the serial, being the ice caves, was created using cellophane wrapping. The show being in black and white and only 405 lines at the time allowed them to hide a lot of the issues within the sets that could be seen by the naked eye. Raymond regards this serial as the most unloved, simply because it was just too ambitious. They asked too much of him with the limited resources and budget provided. The courtroom from episode 5 was originally planned to also feature in episode 6, but rewrites to the final episode of the serial removed these scenes, and thus also removed the need for the courtroom extras to be contracted for 2 episodes. Episode 6 would be the third time that an individual episode shares its name with the overall title of the serial, after episode 1 of An Unearthly Child and episode 1 of The Edge of Destruction, though the latter was produced under the title Inside the Spaceship. During development, this serial was supposedly referred to as Planet Marinus. Work on future serials was ongoing as the Keys of Marinus began to broadcast. Just before it started, the originally planned 6-part post-Spanish Armada historical to come at the end of the season was replaced with Dennis Spooner's Reign of Terror. Following this, on April 14, 1964, David Whittaker sent a memo to Verity Lambert with a draft of plans for a second production season of Doctor Who with another 52 episodes that are as follows. Serial A, David Whittaker's 6-part Spanish Armada story that was delayed after the Reign of Terror took its slot. Serial B, a 6-part future story, potentially Malcolm Hulke's The Hidden Planet, that was considered for this serial slot before. Serial C, a 4-part Egyptian story, which was noted to not be assigned to a writer at this point. Serial D, another 6-part future story, which most likely became The Web Planet. Serial E, a 4-part, quote, sideways story, which most likely became The Space Museum. Serial F, another 6-part future story, potentially Anthony Coburn's The Robots, which had been dropped multiple times from Season 1. It was most likely replaced with Terry Nation's The Chase, the 3rd Dalek story. Serial G, a 6-part American Civil War historical. Serial H, a 4-part future story. Serial I, a 4-part Roman story, which was eventually brought forward and replaced the Egyptian slot. And finally, Serial J, another 6-part future story. It was intended to hire as few writers as possible and rely on ones who had proven to be able to deliver stories previously, forming a writer's nucleus. The Sea of Death would feature a change in the end credits, with the text now being centre-aligned instead of aligned to the left. This would continue throughout the following serials. The Velvet Web features the first instance of the show's episode title card playing directly after the title sequence before any of the episode's footage. Additional details of the Vord were not present within the finished episodes, but written by Terry Nation, including them being invaders of the planet Marinus, initially taking advantage of the people affected by the conscience, but the Vord's long presence on the planet eventually made them succumb to the conscience too. The intention of the Vord was for them to try and be as successful as the Daleks, but this did not come to pass. The Keys of Marinus is also one of only 2 non-Dalek serials that Terry Nation created for the show. Doctor Who would dabble a bit more with the format used within this serial, but instead do it on a seasonal scale, with the likes of Season 16's The Key to Time and Season 23's The Trial of a Time Lord. Modern Doctor Who would also repeat this with its 13th series, the 6-parter connected by its subtitle, Flux. Thankfully, we return to a story that, unlike Marco Polo, has all of its episodes survive thanks to 16mm telerecordings. Though while the story is perfectly watchable, there is cuts present on 2 episodes. Episode 2, The Velvet Web, has 5 edits, cutting out a total of 7 seconds of footage. These cuts seem to be present on the master itself, suggesting they could be due to damage and not censorship. Episode 4, The Snows of Terror, has 3 edits, which total to 10 seconds of missing footage, and just like Episode 2, these seem to be due to damage on the master. Despite the fact the episodes survive on their 16mm telerecording copies, there is only known documentation of telesnaps having been created for 2 out of the 6 episodes, and the 2 that are known to exist aren't currently within the BBC's archives. However, due to said episodes surviving, I doubt these would be sought out by many people. Originally planned for a 1995 release, The Keys of Marinus didn't actually become available to own in its original on-screen format until 1999, being released at the start of March on VHS with a cat number of BBC V6671. The 21st of September 2009 saw the release of The Keys of Marinus on DVD with the cat number of BBC DVD 2616. Also included is commentary on the episodes by individuals involved with the production, including Carol Ann Ford and William Russell, as well as a featurette with set designer Raymond Cusick. The DVD contains restoration efforts to restore the missing seconds of footage present on the 16mm telerecordings. Just like with the rest of Season 1, this serial has yet to receive its official Blu-ray restoration via the Season 1 collection set, with them supposedly now leaving the 60s sets to last to allow as much time as possible to get animated reconstructions of the missing serials completed, with this season relying on the previous serial, Marco Polo, getting its 7 episodes with extensive locations and characters animated, which we are probably still quite a few years away from getting. In 2023, alongside the majority of classic Doctor Who, the 6 episodes of The Keys of Marinus was released on streaming via BBC iPlayer. Before this, they had been available on the paid service BritBox, but are now available to anyone who pays the BBC licence fee. How the rights are acquired for these serials differ compared to their physical media releases, so may one day be removed from streaming if they expire. Before being released in its original form, however, The Keys of Marinus was novelised for release in August 1980 under the title Doctor Who and The Keys of Marinus, being written by well-known producer from the Tom Baker era, Philip Hinchcliffe. This novelisation had an audiobook release in September 2022, complete with new cover art faithful to the original. The opening of episode 1 has a clearly obvious model shot of the TARDIS landing, but considering the technical limitations at the time, this is something I'm glad we get to see at all. This is also the first time the show would depict the TARDIS materialisation. The checking of radiation is a direct callback to Terry Nation's last serial, The Daleks. I like that we get a progression here, that the Daleks actually taught these characters not to repeat the same mistakes as before, showing their progression into this life of travelling they found themselves stuck in. Ian shows some level of self-doubt when he thought he saw a shadow, which has us wanting Ian to not doubt himself so much when we know that what he saw turns out to be a threat to them. I love seeing the Doctor's own curiosity, like when he finds that the sand isn't sand, but glass instead. We get to see Hartnell act out his more wholesome grandfather side of the character. I like to think that Susan's curiosity in discovering new things is because of the Doctor. This is the bond they have made being together all this time, that maybe Susan's unseen parents, and even potentially the Doctor's parents, didn't share, and they got looked down upon for. With that being the reason why I personally think they left Gallifrey, not out of some huge fear, but just because they wanted to go out and experience life, instead of just staying back in their glass dome and looking at it from afar. When Ian shouts to prevent Susan from going into the acid sea, I don't get why Susan is clutching onto Barbara like it's the end of the world. Why didn't she protest back saying, "What, Ian?" and look for herself, instead of them getting Barbara to do it? She's encountered Daleks at this stage, which is a lot more frightening than acid in my opinion. While the DVD subtitles has the Doctor say "lent her yours" in regards to Ian's shoes, Hartnell's line delivery clearly says hers instead. Just like the Daleks, this serial makes use of painted backgrounds to give the illusion of an extended hallway that ventures off into the distance. Just like with that previous instance, I think the black and white picture and the 405 lines helps cover this up better than if this technique was used with more modern technology. Susan exploring the hallways of the giant pyramid is something I'm personally not bothered by. I just think that by this point in her travels with her grandfather, that she wouldn't be so quick to be scared of things. We know that not only has she encountered a bunch of things on screen by this point, but the Edge of Destruction also established that her and the Doctor also had previous adventures off screen. It makes it feel like she hasn't grown as a character, unlike the other three who have. When the Doctor is imprisoned with Susan and Barbara, he shows some level of admiration for Ian, stating he is resourceful and has hopes that he can free them. This shows the Doctor has come to trust these two school teachers at this point, showing that unlike Susan, he has had character development. The invisible force field around the TARDIS is believable because of the actors, with this being before the production team could have used special effects to represent it. I like the reference back to Marco Polo near the end of the Sea of Death, connecting the ongoing story of these characters, with Ian not wanting to have to go through all of that bother again, and accepting the quest they are forced to undertake with less of a struggle compared to that previous time, showing Ian has grown from that experience. Arbitan, previously mentioning the exact word, dematerialization, is interesting, as it reveals that he is somewhat knowledgeable about that type of travelling technology. This also alludes to the end of the episode, where it's revealed he has teleporting technology via the travel dials that has the same principle as the TARDIS, except it only travels through space, not time. The look of this device is actually quite similar to something modern Doctor Who would introduce, the Vortex Manipulator, with it not being surprising if Stephen Moffat was inspired by the Keys of Marinus when coming up with that device. The Velvet Web has a comedy liner from Ian, where after they've been given the vast amount of food, he sarcastically states that this is where they pay the bill, which got a good laugh out of me. The flashing lights at the start of the episode are clearly there to warp the travellers' brainwaves into believing they're seeing the beautiful environment in front of them. I like that the Doctor isn't so easily convinced of the paradise that they seem to have in front of them, testing their limits of being provided with so-called anything they wish. Ian again self-doubts himself after being suspicious of Altos. It works in the fact that you want the other characters to believe Ian, because I do think he is perfectly right to think these situations are strange, whether he's used to Earth's customs or not. I enjoy how they then instantly prove Barbara wrong, who was initially so sure to just accept this supposed paradise, when the episode wakes her up to the reality that this is all just an illusion, and they're not really where they think they are. Again, keeping the trend of Barbara being one of the first of the group to work things out, after similar cases in The Edge of Destruction and Marco Polo. I wish the Doctor was more willing to listen to Barbara after his previous skepticism, but considering those devices placed on their head, it makes sense as to how they are now convinced of the illusion, something that Barbara must have had done to her off-screen beforehand to convince her so easily too. The Doctor makes mention of not being able to control the TARDIS's destination in this episode, which further adds reason for why the mention of them landing in 1963 to fix the TARDIS's scanner and enable colour television makes sense to have been removed. The brains in the jars interestingly call the Arbitans humans, suggesting that maybe they are an offshoot of the human race who settled on Marinus in the future, though I would not be surprised if this was just an oversight by the writers, considering the term humans is a regular term used to describe people. Susan being barely used in this episode could support the suggestion that they just didn't know what to really do with her. It's a shame that they didn't utilise her telepathic abilities here to have some level of resistance to the mind control. The plus side to this, though, is us getting more focus on Barbara being an outcast and being the one to save them. The Travellers not finding a key in this episode makes me assume that the one that Arbitan already had could have perhaps been found at the conclusion of this episode at one point within the script's development. Though maybe the whole point of him already having one was to establish to the Travellers what the keys look like. I like how we see Susan's concern for her grandfather when he says he's going on ahead, showing how she does care for him, something we also saw within the Singing Sands episode of Marco Polo, with her getting upset when the Doctor refused to be around her and the others. The Velvet Web, at least to me, seems to be a faster watch than the Sea of Death. most likely due to how that first episode had a lot of heavy exposition work to explain their situation. Meanwhile, this second episode is all about the mystery within its isolated episode, thus lending itself to a faster pace. Out of the 6 episodes, this episode is my favourite, with the overall illusion and mind control concept mixed with the heavy focus on Barbara, who I always enjoy seeing getting to be the one to figure out the problem and carrying out the solutions, with the plot of the episode having potential to be a multi-part serial of its own. In the screaming jungle, Susan's sensitivity to all the noise in the jungle could come off as autism coded, where the noise of the jungle is causing her sensory overload. This, alongside the previous episode where she seemed to fall asleep quite quickly after the flashing lights and noise. While the Doctor falling asleep is written off as him being old, Susan's is explained more as her getting overexcited. Maybe she also got sensory overload in that episode, which increased her tiredness. While it was most likely never written with this intention in mind, it's certainly a way to make sense of some of Susan's less than stellar character traits. I do feel bad for Susan, having just had to part with the Doctor, and then not long after, having to part with Barbara and Ian as well. It must be hard for her to have to travel with these 2 strangers she doesn't really know. Susan going on ahead first suggests that this episode would have been Susan focused after the last episode had Barbara go on ahead first and then featured her being the one to save everyone. But this isn't the case, as Susan pretty much gets sidelined instantly as soon as the others join her. This, alongside the Doctor being absent for 2 episodes due to Hartnell being on holiday, pretty much paints this story as a focus on Ian and Barbara, with them ending up doing all the grunt work in finding the keys. Barbara makes a good point about wishing Ian didn't treat her and Susan like fine china all the time. This is something that people take from this era of Doctor Who and address it as the show being sexist towards the female characters, so it's nice to see Barbara actually acknowledge it. But as Susan says, she thinks it's nice that Ian wants to look after them all the time. I don't think it's fully coming from a place of sexism and that they can't look after themselves, but more that he does genuinely care about them and doesn't want anything to happen to them. As I was re-watching this episode, I joked that the episode could have been over in 5 minutes, considering how Barbara quickly finds the key if it wasn't for that meddling statue, though this was before the episode revealed it wasn't the real thing. This episode, to me, shows that Ian and Barbara are strong enough characters to hold the show without featuring the Doctor or Susan, and goes back to how the initial pitch for the show actually had Ian and Barbara as the 2 main characters, with the Doctor being the 3rd character with a mystery to him. The Snows of Terror features the character of Vaser. Right from the beginning, there is something unnerving about him as soon as you see him overlooking Barbara. I'd hoped that even back in the 1960s that this behaviour disturbed and disgusted people. It's something that goes quite far for Doctor Who's family target audience in my opinion. This story still somehow got a U rating on its VHS release despite this. Susan in this episode is still unfortunately continuing her character trend that shows the writers don't really know what to do with her. She ends up getting mummed a lot by the other female characters, Barbara and Sabitha, who have to keep reassuring her. Based on her past adventures, especially with the Daleks and Marco Polo, I do wish they'd have written her to be a bit more confident in herself by this serial, with the writers surely knowing that by this point in the show, she would have gained at least some experience in her travels. It's as like Susan didn't hear or believe Vaser when he said there is no other exit to the cave, as she asks Ian and Barbara if they can go back, which they know they can't. This is probably because she's been written here as the stereotypical scared teenage girl. I like how Sabitha questions what Iceland is, adding that little touch to her character of how she wouldn't know what Earth is. Unless Sabitha falling over was an accident while filming, I don't see the need for them having to do that. It's a bit jarring how suddenly there is a full bridge across the chasm once Ian catches up with the others. We missed the scene where they reassembled the original bridge, though we can assume Susan did it, considering she was the one to go across first and did attach the bridge to the logs as she traversed them. This is probably the most productive thing Susan does in the entire serial. Sentence of Death has Doctor Who tackling with a murder mystery courtroom drama. The Doctor's return in this episode is a highlight, as it feels like we haven't seen him in ages, with him being instantly willing to defend Ian being something that to me feels like it works, because by this point in the season they've come to trust each other. Had this happened earlier in the season when they had trust issues, it wouldn't feel as earned. Getting to see the Doctor become a private investigator, so to speak, is actually quite entertaining, alongside seeing Susan and Barbara actually act out the scene of the crime. I will say that Susan trying to help figure out the crime is actually a better usage of her character within this serial compared to previous episodes. This episode, like the Snows of Terror, has another male villainous character who attacks women. This is something that to me shows that Terry Nation probably ran out of time to make this villain that bit more unique, compared to the one from the last episode. The episode also ends similar to the other one, by putting Susan in danger, again depicting how they didn't really know what to do with her, and thus made her a damsel in distress. Though considering it's later revealed that Carla was a part of the whole murder scheme, the whole domestic heard within the episode could have been staged, considering she's fine killing Aidan later on, though one could perhaps take from this that she was actually in an abusive relationship with him, and this was the perfect way to get her out of it, by killing him, with the abuse she suffered being why she's so cruel to Susan when kidnapping her. Just like with the Velvet Web, this episode is flowing much faster to me than the others, which unfortunately in this case makes it feel like Aidan's confession comes a bit too fast for my liking. Barbara mentions an Earth method of crime investigation, fingerprints, which confuses Taron, with it being a running theme throughout this serial by this point that the people of Marinus are confused by these mentions. Unlike how the other episodes ended with the start of the next within the next location, the titular Keys of Marinus episode continues the plot of the Sentence of Death, with the culprits of the murder still to be found out. Barbara takes charge at the beginning, knowing she cannot trust Taron, and knows there must be something amiss that happened since they've arrived at Melanus. I enjoy how much of a focus these episodes put on her intelligence, which unfortunately makes it contrast all the more to how little Susan's contribution overall to the story is. I assume the Doctor's absence from the start of episode 6 is due to him most likely being featured in the courtroom scenes that were cut from the script, though he appears after Susan has been found. Henley Thomas fluffs one of his lines of dialogue within this episode when he states how doubts aren't enough to ask for a stay of execution. This wasn't allowed a retake due to the tight production schedule. The Doctor's intelligence is shown when he reveals he has known where the micro key has been the entire time, but he knew to withhold the information until the right time as to not implicate Ian. The Doctor claims to have met the founder of skepticism, Pyro, and suggests it's a good quality for the Melanus law force to have. When watching the scene with Yartek impersonating Arbitan, I caught on that Ian had given him the fake key before he officially reveals he did, knowing Ian isn't gullible enough to just hand it over like that. While the romance between Altos and Sabitha isn't something that really gets brought up until the final episode, it doesn't really feel forced either, as these are two characters who have been in each other's company for a while by this stage, and have also had a lot of off-screen development, due to the limited runtime these episodes have. The final episode splits half its runtime between solving the mystery built up over the course of episode 5, and then resolving the entire 6-part story itself. This is an odd way to pace the end of the story, as it contrasts with the pattern the previous episodes had established. And just like how the first episode began, the final episode ends, with the TARDIS dematerialising away, with an extended shot of the island. I think this serial is a perfect example from classic Doctor Who's tenure of the individual episodes using really serious sounding titles, with the likes of The Sea of Death, The Screaming Jungle, The Snows of Terror, and Sentence of Death, sounding very dramatic, which humours me. I'm glad that the Keys of Marinus is not missing, as it would no doubt be incredibly hard to animate in the same vein as Marco Polo, The Crusade, and the Daleks' Master Plan, due to the high variety in locations. Raymond's insights into the set design for the Keys of Marinus really does show you how important each and every individual working on these productions are, especially when Terry Nation had admitted to him that he didn't know what else to write, so told Raymond to come up with something himself. I wouldn't be surprised if this is another casualty of the time crunch this serial was on. Terry was probably thinking about a lot of the other more major story beats, alongside him having to essentially co-write this serial with story editor David Whittaker to get it complete in time for production. It really does sound like that set design job must have been really hard some days, with the script writers and directors not being clear enough, mixed with a limited budget and the pressure of the producer to make it look good. I commend Raymond for being able to pull it off as well as he did. This serial in particular was clearly a bit too ambitious for its time, which unfortunately does sometimes happen within stories like this, and even today we end up getting stories too ambitious for the budgets they're given. Just like with Marco Polo, there is some colour imagery for this serial that, while shows more of the set limitations they had at the time, still shows how vibrant and beautiful the set dressing and costumes can be for one of these BBC productions, despite said limitations. As talked about with examples within specific episodes, this serial is probably one of the worst depictions of Susan, where she is treated as this teenager who is scared a lot and isn't that intelligent. This is not what Carol Ann Ford was pitched when she accepted the role, with Susan having meant to be a much more interesting character as seen within the first episode of An Unearthly Child. This is something Carol Ann Ford has noted herself about this serial in particular, calling Susan pathetic, and I would not be surprised if this is when she started to feel that she wanted to leave the show once the initial 52 contracted episodes had been completed. Based on the outline for the following season, it seems that Carol leaving could have been the reason why we ended up with another pseudo Edge of Destruction situation, where they had to put a shorter story not initially planned into production to introduce the new companion to replace her. It is a shame to me because there are glimmers of this better character underneath within these serials, and we know that Carol was 100% capable of playing that, but she just wasn't given the material or direction she should have been. This is something that is quite possibly a casualty of the show's quick production turnaround, which was especially prevalent with this serial, considering how quick Terry Nation had to create this story. It's such a different world to today, of where The Keys of Marinus was written in February 1964 and released in just 2 months during April 1964. We're now a far cry from that, where we can wait 2 to 3 years between a season of a TV show now, though the hopeful upside to that is that, unlike Keys of Marinus, those stories today hopefully have more time to be written, directed and edited to optimise everything from the characters to the plots to the location to the pacing. While that's the hope, we unfortunately know that even in this situation, stories might not turn out the best they can be, but we as viewers have a lot of hindsight that the creators do not. Hopefully, once this serial gets a Blu-ray release in the collection set, it gets a more thorough making of documentary, considering its status of having such a quick turnaround from script to screen. There's got to be a story there they can make one with. Overall, while I don't think this serial is bad, and I do enjoy the scope and ambition it has, I think that the scripts were definitely a bit too much for the limited production capability they had at the time. Susan's characterisation being probably the worst out of her tenure in the story does hinder it as well, though Ian and Barbara 100% steal the show, with William Russell's and Jacqueline Hill's performances keeping you invested within the story. Hartnell, when he's actually featured within the story, is also on top form, with his time as Defence being a personal highlight of mine within the show's first season. I now have an active channel membership available. This will grant you exclusive perks like emojis in the comments, usernames listed in my outros, and updates to what's coming next posted exclusively for members in the community tab. But the best feature is you get 5 days early access to new videos, and you will be supporting me at the same time. To find out more, you can click the join button on my channel page. Thank you to anyone who considers becoming a channel member. Thank you for watching. Please see the video description below for interesting links, sources and credits. My current goal is to reach 1,000 subscribers, so if you enjoyed, please like, subscribe and comment. Until the next time, goodbye.